This video is just going to take you through the build process for the drive system for the ALT droid, the 39.1% droid that Tim Berry has kindly designed for us. This is finished. This is how it should look once it's all done. So to start off with, I've laid out all my parts here just for one track droid, just so you get an idea of what's needed. We'll gradually see them obviously disappear as we go along. There's also the two bearings as well, which go in to the main housing. And one thing you've always got to remember while you're working is this part here, this curvature here, is the bottom part of the track. So make sure you have this face down, face towards you. That's how I work with it. Just move these out of the way. And then what I do first is you make sure that this is tidied up, so that when you get the motor, which I've soldered already, and you have the best thing to do is have the tabs as they are and solder the wires on. You can use a bit of heat shrink if you want. I haven't on this occasion because unfortunately I bent the tabs that were on the motor and they've actually snapped off. So be careful. There's probably no need to bend them, like I say, and just solder them on. But make sure you solder them on at an angle. They come out sideways, and they come out sideways, which is the same as where the screw holes holding the motor together are. And then when you introduce it to the motor, to the housing, then that will be just right for it. So when you feed it in, make sure that the holes line up nicely. You may have a bit of wastage, a bit of scrap plastic within here, which you may have to clean off, especially at the front here. We found that needs cleaning up a bit, but I've done that already. I've cheated a little bit just to make this a little bit quicker. And also opened out some of the holes. So with this part, I've opened these out to 3mm, just to make it easier for the screw to go through. And I've opened these out to 3mm as well. And I've opened these out to 3mm, just so the screws don't bind too much. You can keep them as they are, as they're printed if you want to, and you can just screw into that. But I choose to have the screws and the nuts in, so just feed them through and it makes life a little bit easier. So what I'll do here, the first thing I'm going to do is introduce the motor and use the 5mm countersunk screws, feed these in, and obviously tighten them up. Now this is where you don't over tighten them, because you'll split the print and that'll just cause you a bit of a pain and have to print another one. So don't over tighten. Just when you feel a bit of resistance, make sure that they're going into the countersink. But that, once you feel it fairly tight, then that should be fine. Yep, that looks good. So now that the motor's in place, we're going to put the gear on. I'm going to use the grub screw that came with this gear. You can change them out if you want. You do have to change them out on the other gear, which we'll get to in a minute, that this meshes into, because the grub screw that comes with it isn't long enough. Don't over tighten it, because you will need to adjust this. You will need to move it a little bit, so just enough for it to bind and hold into place for when you put everything together. Next thing I do is I put this on as well now. So what we do is, because you've got your wires coming off sideways now, they feed through this hole here. So feed your cables through the hole. You can open this hole up a little bit, but it's a bit close. So I've got some solder on this, which I don't really need, but it'll be okay for now. Feed that through and then sit that down, and then you can go ahead and screw this together. So you put your two that side and two that side. Again, a little bit fiddly. You can drill this again if you want with 3mm. Now it's all lined up, just to open them up a little bit more, or 3.1 or 3.2. And now what I'll do, again, I'll just start feeding these in, and I'll fast forward it, just so you don't have to watch this boring bit. So there we go, we've got the 4 screws and nuts in place, all nice and tight. And now we can concentrate on putting all the gears together in the front here. So the first thing we need to do is to get the shaft ready, the 4mm shaft. Actually, you only need one of these, because that's for the other one. And then you get your lock washer, and you need to get this onto here, and that's why this vise is here. So what I do is I lie this on here, get it nice and flat, and then with a hammer just have it in there like so. Just give it a tap like that. So there's only a couple of mil exposed at the front, and then what you need to do is just give it a rotate and try and get it as square as you can, because that's quite important to make sure you get a nice smooth drive and no wobble when it's going. So yep, that looks okay. So we don't need that anymore, so we can move that out of the way. So now that this is on the lock washer onto your 4mm shafts, we're now going to put the front parts together. So I'm just going to, this kept falling off, but I'm going to put it back on now and put it into position, tighten it up a little bit like so. This will need to be adjusted in a minute. And then the next thing we do is we have our gear in here. I've already put this in actually, but what you need to do is put this in a vise or something like that and get your gear nice and square into your print, and just make sure that the hole in the gear is lined up with the hole in the print as well, because this is where you need to lock this into position. And you use the 6mm M3 grubs because they're long enough then to hold on to the print as well, so they go through the print into the gear, but they're exposed enough to still stay in the print so it doesn't rotate. They're nice and tight anyway. Don't open it out too much. You really want to make sure it's quite a tight squeeze in when you clamp it. And I'm just screwing this in and just until the grub screw is exposed, and then just back off a little bit so we don't have to do too many turns to get it onto the shaft. So then you place the gear into position so it's meshing like so. Then we have the spacer, which again I've drilled out a little bit, so there's some free movement in that. Just open it over a little bit over 4mm so it's not too tight on the shaft. And then we have the shaft here. First thing we need to do is use the 0.2 washer. I'm not sure if this helps much, but it's something that Tim and I discussed. And then I should have done this beforehand actually, but put your shaft through your gear. This is quite tight. You can loosen it up if you want a bit more rotation on this gear, but it doesn't matter because it's all on bearings anyway. So feed that through like so. It goes through the spacer. I'll just show that. So we've got our washer on there, through the bearing, through the spacer, into the gear, and then just watch it, make sure it's nice and square, and then in to the bearing like so. There we go. So then make sure you've got some fairly free movement there. That's looking good. And then what you do here, I just just rotate until the gear, I can tighten the gear. Oops. Make sure it's in position so you can get to the grub screw. Put a bit of force there, not too much because you don't want it binding too much, but just give it a bit of, make sure it's okay. Give it a bit of rotation. And then you've got your grub screw that you've got ease of access to, and tighten it up nice and tight. There we go. Yep, that's looking good. Now you can try it out with a battery here if you want to. Just mind your hands on the gears, but you can just touch that on the either way round. It doesn't matter. It just depends. It will just change the rotation of the motor, obviously. But you can just try that and make sure that's rotating nicely. So that's looking good. So once we have this all working nicely and the gears seem to be meshing well, you can put some, I would advise you put some grease in there actually. That's a good thing to do, which I will do in a minute, but I'll just for the benefit of the tutorial, I'll just carry on. Next thing you do, you get these two M5 shafts, the 40mm long ones. I've got these handy pliers, which are like parallel pliers. They're really useful. I'll just use this. Make sure these holes are clean and there's no print left in there, and then it's got to be quite snug, but feed them in like so. Try and keep them as square as you can, as parallel as you can, and that goes in like that. Okay, so that's them in, and then we're going to introduce, these are the shafts that you have the springs on, and then what we do here is you may have to open these out a little bit. So start with 5mm and then just gradually open out more and more. And what you need to achieve is just so that You have to make sure these are parallel, and this should square them up for you once you put this on. I've opened these out to 5.2, I think it was in the end, and just make sure it slides so it's got some give for the pressure of the spring to push this outwards. So that seems okay, so that can go on in a minute with the springs. So next thing you do, you're going to put the shaft into the rear hubs. You need grub screws in here. If you've got an old print, you may not have this grub screw hole, but I do suggest you reprint these if you haven't, because it's very useful. You drop the M3 6mm grub screw in here. It's self-tapping, so just screw it in. I've done that already. And then when you get to the middle, just back it off a little bit, so you've got the 5mm diameter hole for the shaft to go in. It's 32.5 long shaft. Just feed it in, have it level with that face, and tighten it up. You shouldn't have to go far because you've hopefully just left it by the edge of the hole. Don't over tighten it, otherwise you'll strip the inside of the print. You'll have to just print another one then, because you can't go on without that working and being nice and tight. Then feed this through here like so, and then we're going to introduce the springs. Put your 2 springs on. Just going to move the track out of the way without completely removing it. Oops. And then we have this again, face down, away from the cable. I'm just going to check this. Just going to check this. Yep, that seems okay still. Take this off. Okay, so we just place that in there like so. We have the track. Make sure that this wheel is on the edge of the track, which means the other gear should go in the holes. Then, a bit of a faff, but feeding that in, poking that in there. There we go. Oops, that's not. There we go. That's over the wheel. Just make sure the gears are meshed properly and all synced up. That's good. Okay, that's nice. So that's how you want it running, really. You just want it a bit of travel when you let go of the tracks. So that's okay with just that one wheel on. So let's now introduce this wheel. That's better. That's good. Okay. So now I'm just going to tighten up the grub screw again. Not too tight. That's better. So like I say, you just see just a bit of travel there as well. Now finally, make sure you've got your track all the right way up. So you've got, this is your bottom part. I know I've said it a few times before and in the other video I did, but that's really important. So that goes into your shrouding like that. And then what you do, keeping in mind that this is your bottom part, you have your bottom part facing you. This goes on here like so. So the 2 holes here are the uppermost holes, and that's the rods that come out of the skirt into the drive system to hold it in place. And it's important here, you're going to use these 2 50mm pieces of silver steel. You want to probably open these out on the pillar drill. Try with 5mm first, but they need to be quite firm in here, quite stiff, because they're going to lock into place. Anything too loose and they may pop out. And that's the same with the skirt as well, which I'll show you in a minute. But make sure that these holes are opened out first. It's up to you, but what I do, I always weld these on as well. So the 2 M2 cap screws, they're just to hold it in place temporarily for me. So I open these out to 2mm, but you can probably get away with just screwing these in, and it may well hold it all in place, but just for a bit of comfort, I always weld them as well. But for now, what I'll do, I will just screw them in for now, and they'll line up. And you cannot use the same part here for the other side. There is a reversed version for the other side of the track, so you do have a left and a right version of these. Otherwise it won't work, and when you go to assemble your track droid, you'll find out that this is wrong, and you'll suddenly find these holes at the bottom, and it just doesn't work. It just doesn't, it's no good. and if you weld this on, you're committed. So do make sure you've got it right. So that's it really. All you have got to do now is I'll just show you the skirt I've got. So this is what I'm working on at the moment, which I'll show you the finished product on. And these holes here, the rods don't go all the way through. This is why you have them only 50mm long. You have them in here, and it's quite stiff. It's not too bad, but it's just got a bit of resistance there, and they go in like so. And what happens is when you have the track, you have your part of your track here and your skirt, so your skirt will go through these holes here and into your track system, and you'll get a pair of pliers just here, and you'll slide them in and they'll clip into these parts here. So I haven't got my spacer here, which you'll see on the insulation into the track shroud, which another tutorial I've done, but this will drop in like so. Your wires will feed into through the leg, and then these rods will go here and then just pop in and locate into those like so. And that's the end of the tutorial.